All right, guys, sit with me for the next half an hour or 60 minutes. Please, I'm going to try to get through this as fast as possible, but I'm going to try to paint you a picture of what's coming. It's going to be impossible for me to enumerate all of the indicators pointing us towards imminent escalation in global conflict. I mean, look at the map today. This is absolutely insane. There is so much news, bad news today, and imminent news, salient data points, that I don't even know where to start. How do I triage such information? So please stick with me, and if somebody is so kind to put some timestamps, I will pin that comment, okay? But this is an urgent video. They're always urgent with Nate. I know it's always imminent destruction, nuclear war. One of these days, unfortunately, you guys are going to think back to when I was making these videos and you're going to be like, holy shit, how could I have not have seen all the signs? Not you guys, but people who may have brushed it off. They're going to remember. And if you're here hiding in the comment section, it's okay. I won't fault you for it. Let's get to what we need to talk about. Seoul nuclear emergency test. Now, the big story of today is highlighted in red here, and that is Russian nuclear command and control targeted in the recent drone strikes, as well as the homes of many Russian elites. There's a lot of information coming out about that. This, of course, is one of the criteria, one of the boxes that get checked as to whether or not Russia legally has the right, according to them, to use nuclear weapons. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. And there is a possibility that Russian Doomsday planes have been activated, according to the OSINT crowd. Now, what I want to say about that, first and foremost, before we go to this data point here, Seoul nuclear emergency test. This was not just a test, okay? That was very significant. Now, before we talk about that, I just want to briefly touch on this here. Apparently, the Russians were running some sort of exercise with their command and control Doomsday planes. And somebody on Twitter picked up on this. It wasn't this guy, but it was somebody else. I don't have his information, but basically some of these planes were en route to Mount Yamato, which is one of Russia's primary nuclear-proof, can sustain a 50 megaton warhead bunkers, okay? But here's the thing, and this is what I need to say right from the get-go to any of you OSINT guys watching. This is a good sign and it's a bad sign. It's a bad sign, obviously, because it signals that the Russians are running these nuclear readiness exercises right before our eyes. If this was real world, you wouldn't see this. So anytime you see this, you know that there's still time to prepare, because they're sending a signal to the United States, who monitors flight radar. If you think you are some super sleuth, you're the only one who monitors this stuff, no, the U.S. intelligence apparatus has probably thousands of people working on just this particular thing, monitoring Russian strategic forces, or at least I hope they do. Anyways, you're not going to see anything on flight radar. Those transponders are going to be off. And this is why I say the World War III will not be televised. Just like Jill Scott Heron says, the revolution will not be televised. Neither will World War III. It's just going to happen. But what you're seeing right now with these readiness exercises, this is what you would see in the run-up. This is Russia signaling to the United States that we are increasing our level of combat readiness, strategic combat readiness, and you better back off. Now, when we stop seeing this, we don't know if that's because they've went dark, if they start doing things in secret. The risk is that the United States will also start doing things in secret. And the more things are done in secret, and now as those communication channels are breaking down between the two countries, because there's no more New START treaty, there's no more conventional arms treaty. All of the nuclear treaties are pretty much suspended at this point, so they don't have to share information, even though some sides are saying that they are, but really, you know, neither side trusts each other as far as they can throw them. And they're both pretty big, sizable countries, and the people in the United States right now are pretty hefty because they've been eating well. So I don't think Vladimir Putin could throw Americans too far, and vice versa, okay? Shoigu is no slender, you know, he's no spring chicken himself, we'll say. So anyways, this is very concerning because this signals that while this is not the beginning of the end, while this is not the elites flying to Mount Yamamoto or whatever it's called, because they would be doing that with their transponders off. It's a sign that things are escalating. And this, of course, comes after the attack on Moscow, which should not be understated. You see, people are already acclimated to attacks on Moscow. That's why I say the new normal a year from now is probably just going to be rat burgers or whatever people are feasting on in the apocalypse. Oh, yeah, another instance of cannibalism on 4th Street or whatever, right? By the local ham radio newscaster or whatever. Okay, where do we start here? Seoul nuclear emergency test. Yesterday, everybody was freaking out for some reason. Everybody was freaking out that North Korea was going to launch a satellite. You have to ask yourself why. North Korea has done hundreds of these tests just in the past 2 years. ICBM tests, ones where they've stated that we're doing an ICBM test. In this one, they said that they were doing a satellite test. But everybody, Japan, Seoul, the United States, they were all threatening this massive retaliation if they proceeded with this test. What were they so worried about? And why did the test fail is what people need to be asking. Was this shot down? Were they worried that this was going to be more than just a spy satellite? You see what I'm saying? They've been doing ICBM tests all year long. There was one where a Japanese island, the air raid sirens went off and everybody evacuated to the emergency shelters. But never have they sent out a text message to everybody in Seoul. If you don't know your geography, Seoul's a massive city of millions of people. Everybody in Seoul got this message. Wartime alert is a translation. But essentially it boiled down to, there's a war and you need to get to shelter. Millions of people at once. Guys, this was a dry run. This was a test. Why would they seize on this opportunity? What was different from this satellite launch from other ICBM tests or other satellite launches for that matter? There was nothing. There was nothing different about this other than that the United States and South Korea were launching some, are currently partaking in live fire exercises. Massive military exercises which North Korea believes are simulating an invasion of their country. So is it possible that the United States thought that the North Koreans were actually sending up some kind of EMP or something? It's possible, or some kind of nuke. And if not that, was this just a dry run because they have plans to actually do the country at some point, which is why the Chinese came out today and made some very ominous statements that we're going to get into in just a minute. I'm telling you guys, it's going to be a long video. But this is the message that they sent. Okay? Warning is issued to Seoul area citizens. Imagine getting this on your phone. Citizens, please prepare to evacuate and allow children and elderly to evacuate first. Wait a minute. We're on a peninsula, a very small country, and a very densely populated city that's loaded with skyscrapers. Where the hell do we go? Could you imagine what would happen if we got this message here in Los Angeles, Toronto, New York City? It would be total, I was going to swear, effing pandemonium. Now, because these Eastern societies tend to be more orderly and collectivist, it was probably not that crazy. But they probably wanted to do a test. Because here's what happened. Not everybody received the same message. According to this report, I can't remember where I got this one from. I get news from 50 different sources. All of them are more or less credible. And of course, you cross-reference and you try to just cross-compare to connect the dots. Anyway, South Koreans who typically shrug off North Korean missile launches. It says it right there, right at the start. So what's the big deal about this one? We're awakened Wednesday by air raid sirens and shelter warnings following an attempted North Korean satellite launch. You know what, guys? I think they genuinely believe that a big frickin' war is going to start soon, and then they need to see how people are going to respond. and they need to test out the weaknesses in the system. That's exactly what this was. I'm 100% convinced. Just after 6:30 a.m. local time, cell phones in Seoul vibrated with loud alerts along with accompanying text messages warning residents to prepare to take shelter. For some, the message was labeled a wartime alert. For some. Why just for some? Were people given different messages to see how they would respond? Because I'm presuming that in these societies, there's probably apps on people's phones that can track their location and what their activity is. And I would not be surprised that all of that data is going to be aggregated to see what the outcome was. Did people who were sent a message that said, emergency, head to the shelters, did they respond differently to people who, were told that there was a war alert? Did they rush to the shelters faster? Was this a social psychology experiment of sorts? Outside on Seoul's mostly empty streets, public emergency system blasted sirens and verbal warnings saying the young and elderly should be given evacuation priority. That would never happen here. People would be climbing over each other, unfortunately. 22 minutes later, because we're individualists, right? Individualist capitalist societies, and Seoul is very capitalist, don't get me wrong, but they still have a collectivist kind of homogenous culture. We thrive in times of abundance more than collectivist societies, but when the shit hits the fan, it's the authoritarian collectivist societies that rule. 22 minutes later, Seoul officials sent up a text message saying that it was just a warning. It was sent in error. Sorry to the thousands of people that we probably just gave a heart attack. The warnings were prompted by a failed North Korean satellite launch. The missile carrying the satellite crashed into the sea about 200 kilometers west of the sparsely populated Icheong Island off South Korea's west coast. Just a run-of-the-mill test, or the equivalent. In fact, far more innocuous than a missile test, because the North Koreans said, hey, this is a satellite we're trying to launch. Before, they have explicitly stated, we're doing an ICBM test. There might be a nuke on this thing. You don't know. So why were people freaking out this time? That is the question. And why was it unsuccessful? Did the US take it out with one of their directed energy weapons? Or was there something? Was it hack? Was it electromagnetic or electronic warfare? Who knows? But that is weird. That is very weird. The Chinese have a lot of satellites. So I'm surprised that the North Koreans can't put up a satellite with the connections that they have with the Chinese. Or was this just a dry run? Was this like a SpaceX type, natural part of the process of, first you have to get to this phase and then, okay, you've troubleshooted that phase and now the next launch is going to be successful. Is it that sort of thing? It's very, very difficult to know what's going on, but something big is happening in the Eastern Front. Okay, because there's just so much shit going on. You have Elon Musk. I didn't want to focus. You know what? We're going to come back to this Eastern theater in just a minute. I got a lot of stuff to talk about with Elon Musk going to China. It's not what people think. People think, oh, it's great news. It's a sign that, the coupling is going to continue and everybody's going to get along and hold hands. No. He went there to talk with the Chinese because they know what's going to happen. They know there's going to be rapid decoupling and they're trying to figure out who's going to get what. Anyways, all kinds of shit. Taiwan wanting to go under the nuclear umbrella. Xi saying that they got to prepare for dangerous storms and worst case scenarios. Not wanting to talk to the U.S. Department of Defense. Man, like I'm telling you guys, it's absolutely insane. I wish I could just give you my brain for a second. And then I wouldn't have to talk about all this stuff. Where do we start here? We need to start with this. Russian elites' houses targeted. Russian nuclear command and control targeted. Now, in this drone attack yesterday, depending on which sources you consider, some people say that there was 9 and they were all shot down. Other sources say there was up to 40 and half of them hit their targets, even though there really is no video showing, the hitting of targets, at least not in a way which did a lot of damage. There was a couple buildings who were, scathed in a minor fashion, but nothing major. Now, what you're seeing here is a map of all the places that were targeted. The red dots are where basically the they were shot down, and I believe these are like missile defense systems, okay? But importantly, there were a lot of homes in the line of fire of Russian elites. So Putin has a lot of different residences. He's got residences all over the place and probably bunkers in Mount Yema, whatever the hell it's called. But this was critical because this happened, a lot of these took place and were downed in Moscow suburbs in and around where the Russian elites are. Now you would think that there would be a target for these things. That even, you know, somebody who was trying to instill terror in the hearts and minds of the Russian people would try to pick a good target and not just some 7-Eleven or whatever the equivalent is in Russia. Some poor schmuck who's just, you know, going to buy whatever from the store gets hit by one of these. Eventually, though, somebody will get killed in Moscow as a result of one of these attacks, and that is going to be more visceral and it's going to prompt a more aggressive response. This one didn't do that. And neither did the one on the Kremlin. People are talking about how they need this in order to increase the war effort. And this is one of the arguments for it being a false flag. If you didn't see my video yesterday, I provide the 5 possible motives for the recent drone attack on Moscow, which one I believe to be most plausible. I believe the most plausible explanation that this was done in an attempt to provoke a broader conflict and thus the involvement of NATO, because Ukraine's back's up against the wall right now. We're going to talk about what's going on in the battlefield in just a minute. Why the Russians, day after day, throughout May, have been trying to throttle and thwart, I should say, the plans of the Ukrainian counter-offensive, the long-anticipated, now being referred to as the summer offensive. Anyways, so they're looking for prime targets. But the other target, okay, that was so critical that they were attempting to hit was a nuclear command and control center in this place here, Vlasica. Apparently, this is where the home of Russia's strategic nuclear command, like the top of the hop. This is where they believe one of these drones was intended for. Now, if you know about the Russian nuclear doctrine, you know that the Russians like to cross their T's and dot their I's, okay? And, you know, one would presume that these nuclear doctrines are just for show. And this has been my theory for the longest time. This is for public consumption. But there's a certain list of criteria that boxes that must be checked in order for Russia to legitimately, at least in the minds of their people and their system of governance, to utilize nuclear weapons. This is the biggest one. If you are attempting to neuter their ability to utilize their command and control or their strategic forces, that is part of the Russian nuclear doctrine. Okay? If this was true, that they were targeting this location, then that's a serious escalation. As said here by this report, the only reason for which Russia could strike a nuclear blow or the only reason why they would strike, and this is a translation, is to amaze and startle the whole world. But let's leave that to inadequate individuals. Believe me, there is a real threat and necessity. If and when there's a real threat and necessity, Vladimir Putin will press the button. That's why they want to take him out in the West, he concluded. This is the central command post of ground-based strategic nuclear forces, and headquarters of Russia's strategic missile forces are located in Vlasica. This is where one of these drones allegedly was intended for. And of course, this is most definitely going to escalate the war with NATO. As I said in my car yesterday when I did that video, I could not imagine that we've already become normalized to drone swarm attacks on Moscow and there being no urgent response. And you can tell that the West is they're waiting to see some, panic or some contrition amongst the Russians, some anxiety about the situation, to see Putin in a panic state. But this guy's cool as a cucumber. Every time you look at him, he's barely fazed. I mean, you could literally, it seems, drop a nuke and he'd just be like, we'll see what we're going to do about it. And I think that has the West concerned. And it should, because the Russians aren't even using their military yet. The big part of it, like the real part of it. And this is the deception, okay? This is the grand deception that is happening right now, is that 90% of Russian forces are lying in wait. Even now, after the Wagner left, now you have the Chechens going on the offensive again. So they're just cycling them out. It was the Chechens who went into Mariupol with the support of the Russians. And then it was the Wagner after that, you know, who were really doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And so they're holding these forces in reserve. They're holding their best equipment in reserve because they know what's coming. There's a war with NATO coming. We don't know when. We don't know how the story is going to play out. But as that amazing commenter said on that comment yesterday, we know the plot. This is the plot. They're blowing up road junctions on Ukraine's, Russian, and Belarus's border where the three countries meet. They're blowing up that road. Okay, we've seen all of the fortifications along the northern Ukrainian border, along the border with NATO and the Baltic states, and Belarus and NATO and the Baltic states. We see this escalation happening before our eyes, and I cannot, for the life of me, find a way to encapsulate the gravity of the situation and just give it to people, because we've been doing this for a while. You know, it's been about a year and a half, but it's happening. It's happening right now. And what's going to happen is our store, CanadianPreparedness.com, is going to get slammed when all this happens. When it starts, when it becomes real and becomes visceral for people, when there's some big event that happens, maybe when the counteroffensive starts and a bomb falls in Poland and all of a sudden Article 4 is invoked and what are we going to do? That's when people are going to start to panic and we're going to be swamped. So I'm telling people right now that this is the time when everybody's just in la la land, okay? When people don't realize what is happening around the world, and this is a global phenomena right now, whether it's Serbia, Kosovo, whether it's stuff going on in South America, even on the border stuff is somehow related to this whole global conflict calculus. You have things going on in Syria where American planes are apparently not abiding by deconfliction policies, and they are turning on their weapon systems when they fly by Russian jets or Russian equipment. You have stuff getting ready to pop off in Israel and Iran. You have things on the Iranian border with the Taliban. You have the Korean situation. You have the Taiwan Strait situation. Everything is just simmering right now, and it's getting ready to flare up. And it could all just kind of start to blow up at the exact same time at this point. I think if we were to see a rapid market crash, that might be the final trigger. There almost has to be some final impasse, financial impasse or otherwise, that just pushes everything over the edge. Where it's kind of like that, the shootout at the OK Corral comes to mind, where, was it Val Kilmer or what was the other actor's name? Where he just looks in the guy's eyes and he's like, okay, I know, we both know that it's coming. We don't know when it's coming. And then all of a sudden you can see it in his eyes that he's ready to draw his gun. And then it starts, and then you can't put that back in the box, okay? So I feel as though, and it's a feeling, not a fact, I realize that, but looking at all the data that I'm aggregating, this situation is not improving. Guys, there was days throughout the past year where I would finish doing a video and I'd be like, you know what? Now that I think about it, maybe it's not that bad. Maybe I'm over-exaggerating this. Maybe I'm just too close to these problems. But not anymore. Lately, it's just been day after day. It's like, this is not slowing down. Like, this is a truly insurmountable problem that is escalating by the day. It's untenable. There is no possible way out of this. And the Russians are not going to want to negotiate, even if there's rumors now of the Americans saying, hey, we need to, according to Politico anyways, if you believe what they have to say, they're saying that the Americans are now thinking about a plan B. If the counteroffensive fails, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to try to broker a deal at that point? Are we going to try to push for some demilitarized zone, a DMZ, just like in the South Korea, North Korea situation? But the problem with that is that Russia's not going to go for it. Russia's going all the way. They are going all the way. They're going to Odessa. They're probably going to go right up to Kiev, and they're not going to stop. They are going all the way. The reason why is obvious, because they know they cannot trust us. It's just that we can't trust us. We don't trust our own government. Look how divided we are. They don't trust us as far as they can throw us, and as I've already said, that ain't far. So this is going to end badly for Ukraine, I believe, unfortunately. I mean, they could make some headway in the upcoming offensive, which Lindsey Graham is saying is going to be some sort of display of a brilliant historical maneuver, that it will be remembered how Zelensky was just a brilliant general, and he managed to defy the odds in so many ways, because of course they're not going to have the manpower and equipment. They're going up against a force which is many times larger, possibly 10 times larger, and they're going to try to do this. And I'm not saying they're not going to make some headway, and I'm not saying there aren't things you can't do in that situation, especially if you have sleeper cells, who are waiting to be activated for the counteroffensive. That's one thing that just occurred to me, is that it's possible that they do have a lot of supporters that are still in the annexed territories that are waiting to activate once this counteroffensive begins, kind of like these stooges here, and that's what they are. Freedom of Russia Legion is recruiting Russians to storm. These are the self-proclaimed Nazis. Okay, they really, that's what they refer to. Before all of this started, before we were referring to them as heroes, or at least, not calling them what they are, that's what they were defined as by even the most liberal of media sources. And now we are cheerleading these clowns as they trigger World War III. These useful idiots. Now, if they were a part of the Ukrainian army and they were, they were following the direct orders, and some people think they are, following orders from the higher up, and I'm sure they are to some extent, then to me it's perfectly justified, don't get me wrong, for Ukraine to target Russia. This is war, after all. And part of the problem is that Germany now and the United States are basically saying Ukraine can do what it wants with the weapons that we give them. That's a big problem, because Germany has now canceled 4 out of 5 of the Russian consulates. Okay? Think about this for a second. Germany, the country who's going to be sending 500-kilometer range Taurus missiles, probably pretty soon, sooner than later if they haven't already sent them. And I know they're just talking about this, but everything they just kind of think about, eventually it becomes reality in this conflict. You got the Leopard tanks. You got the German defense minister saying that we're about to see the biggest battle since World War II. They're hinting, they're dropping hints. You got these Nazi guys on the border. You got the Nord Stream thing, the complete severing of Germany and Russia. I mean, it's right there for everybody to see what's going to happen. You got the Belarusians installing Russia's finest missile defense systems along their borders, not with Ukraine, but with all the NATO countries, pointed in that direction of Poland, of the Baltic states, in and around Kaliningrad. I mean, it's clear. People are going to look back at this and say, it's just going to be like the 2020 run-up in the markets. People are going to be like, how could I not see that was a bubble? How could I not see what was going on? We'll have seen it. We'll be like, yeah. But probably won't be many people around to brag to after that. All right. So what's going on in Russia? In Ukraine. Now, I think what's happening, I was watching some Garland Nixon last night, and he had a good point. He's saying that, throughout May, they've been just hitting Ukraine harder and harder. And he made this point about, when you're in a fight with somebody, he used the analogy of boxing. When you're in a fight with somebody, you don't want to give them time to recover, right? You're not going to, what the Russians are trying to do is thwart this Ukrainian counteroffensive or throw a wrench into it. Now, there was all those rumors about Zaluzny. Where'd Zaluzny go? He's still apparently messaging and texting with Mark Milley. Apparently, he texted him the plans. Okay, apparently, Lindsey Graham, of all people, was told what the master plan is going to be, which is nonsense. Because the Ukrainians have said that we don't even tell the Americans everything. And of course, that's how it should be. You want to keep that stuff top secret. So you're telling me Lindsey Graham, of all people, knows exactly what the count... Anyways. What they've been doing is they've been hitting them hard. And it depends on who you believe. But according to the Russians, they've been hitting some very central places that are central to Ukrainian intelligence, command and control, high-ranking officers, places like supply lines that are complicating the Ukrainian ability to start this counteroffensive. So that has put a bit of a wrench into the plans. Now, this is alleged photos of the main directorate of intelligence for the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Remember, we don't see anything that comes out of Ukraine. So I'm surprised that we got this picture. I'm sure that the person who took this picture is probably sitting in the gulag somewhere. But as you can see from this building, it's been pretty heavily damaged and it's covered with something here. So I don't know what that's all about. Is that covered or what is that? Or is that just part of the building? I can't really tell. Either way, it doesn't look good because there's satellite imagery that claimed to show that there was a significant damage done to this building, among other buildings. I would presume they gotta be doing some damage. Otherwise, these massive volleys and salvos of missiles that have been bombarding Ukraine all month, probably in the thousands, is this all in vain from the Russian perspective? Obviously, they're exhausting missile defense, but they got to be hitting something. And right now, the Chechens are on the offensive in the Donbass. So in Donetsk, in Marinka, as well as there's activity in and around Avdiivka. And I'll just show you what the map looks like in terms of the battle map here. So this is Avdiivka. Very similar situation to Bakhmut. Okay, so they're trying to encircle. And is it going to be the Chechens who finally go in there and kind of close that cauldron? It's possible. The Russians still do have Bakhmut. As you see, they swallowed it all and they've pushed them out. Whatever happened to the encircling? Weren't they encircling? Weren't they pushing? No, they're not. It's all bullshit. And they're just going to keep on lying. Maybe they'll surprise us. For those proud Ukrainians who are fighting on behalf of what they believe is true and just, I wish them the best of luck. But it doesn't look good if we're doing a historical analysis. And apparently, Russia sunk their last warship, which I don't think was really going to make a huge contribution to the conflict anyways, considering they really don't have a navy up against Russia's navy. It's not going to change the game at all for them, I don't think. But yeah, some pretty serious stuff going on, guys. What else do we need to talk about? So NATO is having secret meetings to plan for World War III. Okay, now we talked about how the commander of the Chechen military had said that they're on course for a war with the Russians, and they are going to be the Germans. Speaking of Germany, and I forgot about this critical data point, Air Defender 23 is going to be happening in a couple weeks, and that's going to be the largest air exercise in NATO's history, involving 10,000 participants and 220 aircraft. And as I always say, there are no military exercises, only World War III disguises. Would you believe that there's some guy right now, anytime I make a saying like that, he's putting it on t-shirts and he's selling them? Hey, more power to him. Get it while you can, man, because it's about to hit the fan. And when I say about, I'm not saying next week, even next month. I'm just saying that it's inevitable. So you got that, and then you got NATO members mulling secret plans for responding to Russian attack. I talked about this a couple weeks ago. Basically, they're reenacting the whole Cold War plan that they once had, but they're doing this in secret, okay? So at the Vilnius summit coming up in July, which is why they're putting that Patriot missile battery in and around Vilnius, and this is probably why the Russians are running all these strategic exercises and putting the S-400s right across the street from those said Patriot missiles. Political leaders will be asked to approve thousands of pages of secret military plans. Don't like that word, secret military plans, especially when we as a public haven't been told anything about civil defense lately, aside go inside, get inside, STFU, and watch TikTok until you don't have the internet. Most of these plans were drawn up behind doors by permanent military representatives at NATO headquarters in Brussels and other NATO and national defense officials without prior scrutiny or parliamentary bodies and independent experts. So this was rushed, which should be concerning. Now you can go and read more about it. You can just type in a few keywords here and you'll be able to pull up the article. It'll give you all the information. But they're secretly, not so secretly, planning for a war with Russia. They're positioning all the pieces for a war with Russia. They're doing all the exercises for a war with Russia. The biggest military exercises in history have happened this year, whether it be in the East or in France, the one they just ran, or now this one in Germany. I'm telling you guys, I mean, you call me Chicken Little, call me Dr. Doom, call me whatever you want. But one thing you won't do is catch me off guard with respect to what's coming. I can tell you that. This closing of the consulates should concern people, because a similar thing is happening in terms of the breakdown with Poland right now. And the one thing I can't seem to figure out is that Poland is demanding reparations from Germany to the tune of 13 trillion or something like that. And I'm not sure if they're just doing that as kind of trying to blackmail or extort in a way because they know what's coming with the Russians. I really haven't figured that love triangle out between the Russians, the Germans, and the Americans and the Poles. All are somewhat at odds. In fact, all of these countries are autonomous entities unto themselves. So that's something, and that's always been the potential downfall of any sort of treaty organization like NATO, is that unlike the Russians, who are one country with one goal, NATO has all these competing interests, that are above and beyond just the multinational corporations, but actual national interests. And this is why they're never going to give up their best military equipment to the front, to the Ukrainians, who, it's the front. Ukraine means the frontier. I mean, this is a story. It's a Pulitzer Prize winning novel. What else do we got to talk about today? The stuff going on in Serbia and Kosovo seems to be intensifying. You have the Serbian defense minister visiting the troops. One of those things. When you got the minister visiting the troops, that's bad, I think. That's a sign that, they're saying their farewells. Moscow is aiding Belgrade, acts in total cooperation with authorities. They're sending in more, NATO's sending in more troops, another 700 troops, so just another point of escalation. I'll come back to all this other stuff later. Let's head out east. Okay, so we need to talk about what's going on with this Taiwan and China stuff. So this is why China is giving the US the cold shoulder, because Taiwan wants the nuclear umbrella. Can you believe this? Can you believe how far we've come from strategic ambiguity to even discussing putting Taiwan under the nuclear umbrella, as if we weren't already at a heightened state of strategic combat readiness? We need to throw this into the fire. This is absolutely insane to me. What are the powers that be thinking? Really, what are they thinking? Do they truly think they're going to be able to win and to maintain U.S. hegemony? It's not going to happen. There was a run-in with a plane, and look how CNN frames this. U.S. says Chinese jet conducted unnecessary aggressive maneuvers intercepting U.S. spy plane over the South China Sea. This is why in Southeast Asia, or I guess it depends on where you're looking at it from. in the South China Sea, we'll say the U.S. is the biggest possible Karen there is. There is no reason for us to be there in the first place, to be brutally honest. Now, if you're looking at this, and I've said this before, if I had to pick a side, I'm going to pick our side, right? And I can understand it from a global monetary perspective, because the only way to maintain U.S. as the global reserve currency is to contain China and physically contain them. But we're the assholes in this situation. If China was flying just off our coast, reconnaissance planes, surveillance planes, trying to surveil the Chinese and see what they're doing, or surveil us, we would be like, hey, sure, you're in international waters, but we're probably going to let you know that we don't like what you're doing. And that's exactly what the Chinese did. This is what they did. There was a pilot, and you could see how, spooked these Americans were, because they just, and I say Americans, I don't mean that in a disparaging way. They're, Canadians and Americans, we're synonymous, so we're all on the same side here. But they almost seemed like stunned, like, oh, how could you challenge us in, so close to your airspace? We're just up here, we're innocent, right? And of course, this is considered an aggressive maneuver. I mean, they could have done a lot worse, put it that way. And I think they will in the future. I think that was a J-22. It's not looking good, guys. Get those bunkers, get that emergency food prepped up, but don't panic. Whatever you do, don't panic. Stay calm. You have Russian state media TV now talking about how they're going to take out Starlink satellites, if they haven't already done that, because this is how allegedly they are navigating these drones using Starlink. So this is where the multinational corporation component comes into this conflict. And this is where the fascist component even comes in. Fascism is the merger of government and business. And so if you have Starlink working hand in glove with the US government, the Ukrainians, and Elon Musk is, at least his persona, is one who is quite forgiving and apologetic for the Russian cause. He doesn't put the state branding on Russian's Twitter account. He is allowing people back on Twitter. But on the flip side, is the hardware being utilized for the purpose of attacking Russia? And if it is, this is when you're going to see more and more talks about taking out those assets, okay? I talked about the other day, a friend of mine who's a pilot is flying Stinger missiles to Taiwan as they request to come under the umbrella. So they're planning for a war with the Chinese, which is just insane. It's totally insane that they can't see yet the ineptitude of the West's capability to provide them that security. Because no matter how, stalked Guam is, or this chain of islands, the island chain, eventually just the sheer number of the capability of the Chinese, and we don't even know what they have. This is going to fail miserably. And you got to think of the collectivist nature of the Chinese too. They're probably more willing to die for their country because they're fighting, like we're fighting on their turf. We're fighting in their backyard. Now, if we were fighting in our backyard, we would be more willing and we would go the distance. Our guys are not going to be willing to go the distance for this. It's going to be the same thing with Vietnam. People are going to be wondering, what the hell are we doing here? Why are we doing this again? And as soon as you have that, and that's part of the reason why the Ukrainians have put up such an admirable fight, is because they believe in what they believe in themselves. They have that pride in their country. And they're fighting for it, and they're fighting to the death. And they're relentless. We don't have that when we're waging these wars overseas. So the House China Committee is proposing 10 ways to prepare for war with Taiwan. Part of that involves a $19 billion military package. And this is why China is declining to connect with the U.S. military at an upcoming conference in which numerous countries are going to be attending. I can't remember which one it is in particular, but they're just saying, we're not going to talk to you. And today, Xi comes out and he says that the president has warned the country must prepare for worst case scenarios in dangerous storms. That's a great metaphor to use because right now the storm clouds are gathering, okay? And anyone with eyes to see can see it. He says we must be prepared for worst case and extreme scenarios and be ready to withstand the major test of high winds, choppy waters, and even dangerous storms. So he took that metaphor to the max. The Chinese have been preparing for war under the radar for a long, long time. We've talked about the stratospheric balloon program. I have it covered up here, but right across the street in Fujian province, I believe it's called, they have all sorts of preparations, mobilization centers in and around here, civil defense infrastructure, even everybody's phone in this region has an app that directs them to the nearest bomb shelter. It's all hitting the fan. This is why I think this is so delusional, and this might be the last American bubble. This might be the last American stock market bubble. NVIDIA to turn Taiwan into a world-class AI hub. This just screams fraud to me. Yahoo News puts out a video today, and the title is, Retail Investors Should Jump In on NVIDIA, because retail investors are not buying it this time. They need bag holders when NVIDIA reports earnings that don't live up to the hype that they've created. Now, no doubt, NVIDIA is the company. They're the most advanced in their field with the graphics cards and the AI and all that stuff, but they're overhyping it. And the fact that it's so tied to Taiwan and the TSMC chips that they need to do this stuff should be a huge red flag to people. But people are just diving in. The Chinese and the Americans have no open lines of communication. I don't know when the North Koreans have talked with the Americans last. You know, you have Seoul telling their entire population that there's a war and you need to go to the bunkers, and you still have this shyster here, who's like he reminds me of the guy off the movie Don't Look Up, but maybe like what was that other company? Nikola, who was trying to make the hydrogen cars. There's just something about it. Only NVIDIA actually has some substance. But I think that they're trading at 3 times the market average PE ratio. And I'm not saying there's not upside, from a from a market analyst perspective. And, you might be able to make some money on it, but I'm not buying at these highs right now in this current market with a potential war breaking out and Warren Buffett divesting from TSMC. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense at all. This here shows why the decoupling will be so difficult. So this is a Morgan Stanley Global Insight infographic, and it's showing how interlinked technological global supply chains are. So they're trying to show how decoupling. So all of these companies are required for you to get your cell phone or you to get any computer component or whatever, and they all have to work together. And so you can't just pull out one company, because one company is so reliant on the resources from China or the manufacturing, the rare earth minerals. The decoupling is going to be long and rough unless there is just some rapid escalation in the conflict and there's just no more trade. There's just no more companies coming over. Assets get seized and sanctions get imposed, embargoes, the whole 9 yards. Then this could just collapse right away. And I think the reason why Elon went there was not for the reasons that people think. People would think, well, this is great but this is to me one of those things that you would see before shit was going to hit the fan. It's almost like we're going there because we have this huge Tesla factory in Shanghai or whatever it was that we just built. And we need to know what's going to happen if the war breaks out. Are you going to buy it? Are you going to seize it? How are we going to do this? I think that's what the conversation probably was mostly about, or at least that was the subtext. That's what both sides were thinking about. when Elon Musk met with the Chinese government officials, because this is very serious, and things could spiral out of control really, really fast. And when we enter these periods of economic contraction, the more things contract, the greater and more aggressive the war for what remains becomes. Just, game theory, I guess, as it's called. Well, shall we go to the Middle East? There's an interesting video here. I don't have the cluster munitions video. I wanted to show you guys that. Maybe I'll show you it tomorrow. It's just Iran's new 2,000-mile range cluster missile thingamajigger is pretty interesting. And the situation between Israel and Iran is heating up, obviously. It appears as though the Israelis are concerned by reports that the U.S.-Iran nuclear deal is imminent, even though I thought that was, basically DOA, at least up to last year. Maybe there's been new developments. I haven't been following the issue that much. But what it would do is unfreeze billions of dollars. There are rumors that the Iranians pretty much have turnkey nuclear bombs at this point, that their uranium is so enriched that if they wanted to build a bomb, they could do it it wouldn't take them that long, basically. And that they already have the deployment systems for these, so it'd just be a matter of pairing those things. And this is why Israel is launching major drills focused on preparing for a multi-front war on all fronts. They're just getting all the foundation laid for a massive war. If Iran attacks Israel, they say, it will spark total war. I don't know, is Iran going to attack Israel first, or is it going to be the other way around? When you have Israel openly talking about taking out Iranian nuclear facilities, which to me is the equivalent of trying to disarm someone and rob them of their 2A rights. I mean, to be brutally honest, not that I want everybody to have nuclear weapons, but there's no better analog than the Second Amendment for a nation's right to defend themselves with nuclear weapons. It's a great equalizer. You get one little country in the middle of nowhere, if they have a nuke, nobody's going to mess with them. And this is what North Korea knows. And whether you agree with those countries or not, which I don't, I've done whole videos talking about the egregious acts committed by the North Korean government against their people and some of the most heinous crimes you can imagine being perpetrated on their people. But they have the right to do what they want to do. Now, we have to live with that, or we have to go to war with them, and we've chosen to go to war, so I guess I'm just along for the ride. U.S. Air Force pilots in Syria violated deconflict protocols. This is sad, because I was just watching a video where it showed, the Russian troops passing by the American troops and smoking cigarettes, or doing whatever they were doing, fist bumping or whatever. And here we are. Okay, so it appears as though the U.S. Air Force pilots violated deconfliction protocols in Syria by activating weapon systems when approaching Russian aircraft. In a lot of nuclear movies, World War III starts not in Ukraine, but it starts in Syria or Iran. So that may be where it starts. It's hard to say. Maybe when they get these B-61 tactical nuclear bombs that can be easily fitted to the F-16, maybe that's when it's going to start. Who knows? Who really knows? Who really cares anymore, to be honest? Extreme measures. Russia issued a warning to Britain. They're going to break off relations because of their Russophobic policies, they claim. They could cut diplomatic ties. And I'm surprised this guy is still there. I mean, he's being bombarded by BBC reporters with idiotic questions every single day. It's only a matter of time before he bounces. Should we end on some lighter notes? Canada is still burning. Still very much burning. Let's see if we got the smoke forecast here. But there is rain in the forecast. But in spite of the rain, the size of these fires is absolutely insane. The size of these fires in northern Saskatchewan, people don't realize because there's nothing up here. Like really, past this line here, pass around this line, there's like nobody that lives up there. A few guys hunting. But these are the size of the fires. I can't even, how we put that in perspective. Many times the size of New York City. Fires, like the entirety of New York City. And happening on multiple levels, just burning. And this is Halifax here. So what's going on in Halifax right now is there's a fire here that it looks like maybe, no, it's not extinguished yet. So this is the fire near Halifax. The outline part, and this is the city that's being smoked out. But they're not just being smoked out by that fire. This massive fire is blowing the smoke right over Halifax. I mean, that air quality is 250 times, so that's 25 times worse, minimum, than what is considered healthy. Not good. Not good at all. There's been more evacuation states of emergency in northern Saskatchewan. Canada is going to get nuclear subs. We'll get in on that soon enough. And never forget that the senators were issued satellite phones. And, and apparently in Mexico, there were cartels spotted with, guess what? Javelin missiles. Remember the thousands of javelins that went to Ukraine at the start of the war before the auditing started, before the U.S. sent auditors? Well, apparently the cartels have had javelins, though, because they got them on the black market back, I think they were first spotted in 2020, but they're thinking that those might have come from the new batch. What else do we got going on here? Oh, if you guys don't know what NAFO is, I can't remember what it stands for exactly, but it's this online troll army. There's a massive disinformation army. There's a lot of channels on YouTube that are small, like, and I say small relatively. Any channel over 100,000, even over 50,000, is a big channel. If you have a channel that has 10,000 people, you can have a channel that has 1 million people. It's just a matter of, being consistent and putting a lot of work into your videos. But this says it all. What they're doing is there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are trying to game the algorithm to boost viewership of certain videos. This is why certain channels just explode when they're pushing that narrative, the pro-Western media narrative that everybody is familiar with. And this is why channels like mine struggle. Because, and I know that might seem weird, you're getting a couple 100,000 views a video, whatever, but for the amount of work and the amount of people we employ and stuff, that's really not that much. Because especially considering the quality of the content that we bring, and in many ways, and not tooting our own horn, like we have a lot of deference for the process, but we'd like to try to set the standard for the quality of videos that come out in the prepper space, okay? And that's just, we're trying to constantly improve. We're humble to the fact that we don't know everything. We're always trying to get better. In spite of that, there's certain channels that just blow up because they just repeat the bullshit narrative, Ghost of Kiev stuff, right? Now, these accounts on Twitter, and they all say the same thing. Look at this. As a Slovak citizen, I want to say that arming Ukraine is the single best use of taxpayer money for decades. And then this one here. As a Finnish citizen, I want to say that arming Ukraine is the single best taxpayer. So they have multiple accounts and they're doing this. And when you do this, you go and you watch a video. That triggers the algorithm. It adds to watch time. I'm positive this is what they're doing. Because the algorithm is its own functioning system. There's people on the back end who can push a button here and there and, put something on the trending page and give things little bumps. But by and large, the algorithm is its own organism. And you can game it if you have enough different inputs from various places for long enough periods of time. And I think that's what's happening. So, yeah, most of the stuff you read online nowadays is just like people can't be this stupid. And I don't think people actually are. I think the side of reason and moderate thinking is actually winning. but that's not being reflected because we don't have these massive troll armies to show that, right? What else? Oh yeah, the EU is going to engage in something incredibly futile, and that is they're going to try to regulate AI. I mean, that's just stupid. That's never going to work. This is a video we did with Professor Hugo de Garis, predicted 40 years ago. This guy predicted ChatGPT. He predicted the whole thing. He predicted what's going to happen next. Go watch that video if you want your mind to be blown. Central bank demand for gold continues. 2023, new record for how much gold the central bank has been buying. Our population is aging. This video is too damn long. We made it over an hour. Let's end on this note. People in the 1950s, we saved $8,000. Let's buy a home. $7,900. Monthly payments of $50. 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, screen porch. That's all you need. That's basically my house. Today, just spent $193.87 on breakfast. Ain't that the truth? Things are so expensive nowadays. I can't wait for the crash so we can all just, go out and have a coffee once again. Anyways, guys, if you want to buy me a coffee, don't. Just like the video. Click subscribe. Share the videos with people who might be interested. And the best way to support this channel, we have a store, CanadianPreparedness.com. We have everything from freeze dryers, big stuff, hunting e-bikes, the whole 9 yards. We're trying to employ people. This store is, it's more of a, we're not making any money off the store, but it's keeping people employed. And if you want to support a local business, local as in North American, where everything is sourced from companies who make quality products, there you go. That's the best way to support the channel. I don't want to ask people for money or anything like that. I'm not going to ask for donations or put some kind of paywall up. I mean, the one thing I hate the most is those news sites that put up a paywall. It's like I immediately bounce. Why would anybody want to do that? So no, I'm never going to make extra content. It's never going to be the model of this channel. That's the best way to support the channel, guys. Do it while the getting is good, because you can see all the indicators are there. And this is but a fraction of it. This is just today. Imagine what tomorrow is going to bring. Who knows what's going to happen in the next 2 weeks? Lindsey Graham says in a couple days, the big, brilliant counteroffensive is going to come, and I guess we'll just have to see how it plays out. But everything right now is pointing towards we got to get our shit together while the getting is good. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.